And where we left off was looking at this particular example. And the point to note here is not all of the data and the detail. What it's important is this is what you get back once you do the process of evaluation. Each person gets their own individually sent back to them. And then we take all of the totals and aggregate them. You'll never see individual responses. That's where the confidentiality piece comes in. We won't do that at all, but we will show everybody the collective totals and how they change. And it's also important for people to see how they perceive things, because a lot of this is about perception. So what we found is that once we start doing the work and start doing the analysis and assessment, we find that most people are actively doing things that are changed or just not codified. They're not understood. Some people are doing them, some people are not doing them, or the policy and procedures have never been reviewed with everybody effectively. And they've never been reviewed by board members, or they haven't been reviewed in 7 years, on and on and on. There's little things. And then again, once you start doing the work, you realize, okay, this is doable. One little step at a time, and we can make this happen. So because of that, we found that most of the work is planning work. It is listening work. It's active collective learning work. It is community work. So it's not easy. It's not simple. And in the end, it's definitely not cheap. So what we're doing is we're attempting to bring a number of different groups together and consider these little small agencies. Say you're everywhere from 200,000 for agency 1 to 6 million for agency 2. And what we're wanting these folks to do is come together as their agency. You've decided you want to do a plan. You want to go through this evaluation, and you want to dismantle your systems, and you want to take a look at them. So this is agency 1 has decided that. So what we'll do is we'll help you create a planning group. And then this planning group, either every single member of this planning group can participate, or you can have 2 members of this planning group participate. You can have whatever. And what that means is they participate in a learning process. And this learning is literally taking everybody through the steps. The only way that we have found to cut the cost is that you cut the way that you do the listening. You change the way you do the listening so that everybody who's participating is doing the listening. What we're actually asked to do most of the time is you do the interviews, you do the surveys, you take all that data, and then you regurgitate it and tell us what you saw. And what we recommend and what we're trying to do is get everybody to participate in the listening. We design all of the rest of it, and you actually do the interviews. You do the focus groups. You get those surveys, you distribute them, and then we take those back to you, and we say, look, this is the data that you got. What are you going to do with it? So okay, the point being here was once we start this process, we can actually start to create the survey. So let's say agency 1, for example, they're an arts organization and they have a very large constituency. Patrons, they have donors, on and on and on, and they want to do this project. So they start to create a survey, and as a group, they'll work in the agency, and the planning group will help design the survey, whatever, and they bring it with them. They say, oh, look, this is what we're thinking. So we'll bring our survey down to our collective learning, and oh, look, this is what we're thinking. And then everybody in that process starts to support, analyze, reflect on, critique, create, whatever, agency 1's survey. And you do this process with everybody. Eventually, you get some really good, solid surveys that are initial surveys that people do, and they are about your agency and about your work. So we would tailor all of these conversations specifically for you, and at the same time we're working with you to help everybody else. There's power in doing things differently and looking at things from a collective model, a collective learning model, and how do we make that work. So this works for us. This has been very effective, and we saw that we were able to do I'll show you one example where we were able to do this. It was a little more focused because it was a really large project. It was a lot of community members. This particular their planning group was I think, if I remember correctly, it was 27 different people. So that is a large planning group to do interviews and focus groups and data collection and data analysis. So it was a lot of work. Let's talk about that in a second. However, before we move on to that, let's go back to this piece that I recommended we consider. as we think about what we're doing and as we move through this process, I have been inserting little pieces about who I am. Who am I? This is what. So, and the last time we looked at this, we got here. And I said, this is what you know about me. And within all of that, some assumptions. We're making some assumptions about who I am and who you think I am and all of that. And that's important to note. And I asked you to continue to take note about those assumptions that you may make or you're making or whatever. Take note. With that being said, let's move to the next slide, which is just a little bit more about me. And this is important for a lot of different reasons. It starts to give you a little bit more context if you look at the pieces that are on here. So the first one is I've been working in LGBTIQ and HIV/AIDS communities for most of my professional life. However, in that context, I've worked for 2 faith-based organizations who were doing this work. That's interesting. My last name is Spanish, fairly common name in the Pacific Northwest, interestingly enough. That suggests the Spanish last name is a lot about my own cultural background and heritage and where I come from. So I was born and raised in northern New Mexico and from a very small town in northern New Mexico. So I bring a lot of that perspective, and I lived with a lot of that small town perspective for a long time, and I've been married twice. Ooh, personal information. But it's important to note that because suddenly that's a whole different conversation about what does married mean? What does that mean? Interesting. And again, there's lots of assumptions that are embedded in all of those. And as married folks, we don't think about it too much, but we wear our wedding rings and it's just normal. And we don't think about it, but it does make a statement about it. And often it's so easy for heterosexual couples to do my wife and my husband, and they don't even think about it. Whereas I have to really struggle to think about those. I really have to think about those pieces. And I'm drinking my coffee while I'm doing this. I hope you're okay with that. So with that being said, think about that. Again, I don't want to know. No need to tell me. This is only for you. This is all about you and what you're thinking or not thinking. If you do want to talk about it, you're more than welcome to do that. Reach out and chit chat. Okay, so we do, for us as a practice, we are very interested in the assessments. We do all of our own work, but we also created models. I'm a big proponent of acronyms because I love them. That's just a thing. Doesn't mean anything for anybody. But they're simple frameworks. One of the questions that we had during the conversation was, how do we operationalize values? And I wanted to get to this slide. We just didn't have time. So this is one way that I've done it for our agency and for all of our educational programming. And then we talk about this respect model. This respect model is for an individual internal work, but it keeps you in line. It keeps you on the right road. It keeps you in the right direction, focusing on the things that you decide you need to focus on, but that are yours and that are relevant. So again, I think we talked a little bit about this when we were in the session, and you notice my little title is teeny tiny. So the first thing we do is we ask leadership to listen and for everyone else to speak. This is super critical. And it's the hardest thing board members do. And executive leadership is stop talking. Our experience, our time, and our intuition play a lot in how we function and how we act. Yet it's not, even though we might have the answer, here's another way to look at it. Even though we might have the answer to a lot of the questions that we're asking these committees to do, it's incumbent on us for people to explore and find the answers themselves. And for the only reason being is that I can present an answer, but if it is yours that you come up with and we're both right, yay, so much the better. If we're struggling, right, then we need to find a different answer. But the bottom line is we all have the opportunity to find and to listen and find the answers that we needed, right? So with leadership, the biggest thing they have to do is stop assuming and stop doing. And I know that's weird. It's like, how can I be a leader and stop doing? And it is imperative. So again, listening is your first way of not doing. You're not taking a real action. You're listening, and that's going in. Part of that is telling us what you hear, but nonetheless, it's important. So then we also ask that you create a planning committee when we do this work. And that planning committee represents everybody. So it starts to dismantle who is in that group making decisions and guiding the agency. And this is your opportunity to invite anybody. You can invite legislators, you can invite community members. I've seen school board members, I've seen children, I've seen everybody in between on planning committees, and they're all relevant components. So who is your rep? And mostly, who's not there? Who's normally not there? One of the things that I find most fascinating with all of this work is that nonprofits will do a strategic planning process, do the whole 9 yards, and they will never once talk to their frontline staff. And the people that are actually implementing and doing the work have absolutely or very little voice in what they're doing. And it's sad. And it should be exactly the opposite. When you're doing a strategic planning, you speak to the people that are being served first, the people that are serving them, whether they're volunteers or staff, and then everybody else you go after up, you go through the ranks the other way. And it's first with them. And then when you place staff on the planning committee and you empower the planning committee to say, oh, this is your project. You are going to walk us through this. You are going to make sure that we do it well. And then that's when we come in and we help you do that planning committee process well. And again, as you notice, the last thing is that the planning committee members shoulder the burden of active listening. It's a great way to learn this stuff also, right? So it's capacity building in a huge number of ways. So part of the active listening is when we do our focus groups. So we'll shuffle people around so that we have community members listening in on focus groups, that we have clients listening in on focus groups. And we can do focus groups about anything. One group did focus groups with donors. One group did focus groups with all their volunteers. So it just doesn't make any difference which one you want to do. But that's important, right? How are we doing this, and who are we offering this skill to? How are we taking the mysticism and the magic out of strategic planning and saying, let's all do this together. We can learn this and we can work through this. So one example, we had an agency that came to us. Oh, I remember they had already decided that they were going to do their own strategic planning process. This is the first thing. So they were in the middle of it. They weren't in the middle. They had created the committee. They had done all of that preliminary work. They had actually created their first their surveys that they were going to hand out. And what they did was they kind of went crazy. They had 27 members and they wanted 50 interviews. And you should have seen these interviews. They were humongous. They had 13 or 14 questions. They were huge. They were pages long, very in depth. And they insisted that this is what they were going to do. So who am I, right? Okay, do what you know. You know your stuff. Do your thing. So they did an exemplary job. They did all of those interviews in about, I think they did them all within a month, like 3.5 to 4 weeks. All 50 of the interviews were completed. And then we took all of that data, and I was beginning to do the evaluation. I was going to do all of the analysis because that's my standard protocol because, I'm the guy that gets paid to do that stuff. And I'm like, okay, right. And so I just do it. And they were like, wait. No. We don't want you to do that. We want you to show us how to do that. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's different. No one's ever asked me for that. Okay. So we had a great time. And they took all of these, the interviews that they did and we transcribed them. And then they were able to look at all of those. They pulled them apart and started to look for trends and data and all that stuff. They actually informed themselves about how to move forward. And one of the fundamental issues they had in their planning process was how do we dismantle our power? And so we worked with them to figure out how to operationalize that. That's a whole long story, a whole bunch of stuff. But in any case, this is how the process worked for us. And it worked really well. So, and the power of this is getting that planning committee solid, getting them educated, getting them that they understand what's going on and they can participate. And again, there's a different number of models you can do this. If we do it in the standard model, it is a project. If we do it using our planning works model, our little process here, it allows everybody to do this for like $6,000, right? So each one of you pays $6,000. We get the same. You are all collectively learning. The power is much greater, and no one is having to shell out $25,000 to $35,000 to do this stuff. And you get it done within a 6-month period of time. Okay, that's enough of my sales pitch. With that being said, we talked about values, and I think it's important to look and operationalize our values and think, how do we do this? What does this mean for everybody? For us, there's some certain values about learning that we're really, really, really adamant about. And we've done this work for so long that we're like, we absolutely need to make sure that we're clear about what we expect as part of the relationship. So we say, leave your barriers outside of our learning space. So that means when you come in with questions, and you come in with skepticism and answers. During the first part of the presentation, we did that assessment, and some people didn't like it, and it always produces a negative response from folks. And so it's important to do that. So think about what that meant and how that was, what happened. And again, the assessment that I used is not the end all by any means. That's not the point. The point is that we were able to walk through that, have a conversation, and ask the question. Right? They asked the question. There was and while it felt like it could be a little critical of me, it was not. It's a tool. I don't know. You use it, don't use it. I don't know. But the question was asked. It was posed, and that was important, Pete. Right? Leave the barriers. Ask the question, and the barriers are many. Some of us are shyness. Some of us are not. Don't know our voice, and then all the other barriers that exist. Right? So evaluate your situation with honesty and openness. We always think about self-reflection as one of the most important critical elements of doing diversity work. Just is. If you can't think about and do the work internally and can't accept what's happening internally, you won't change, and that's the hard part. And it is hard work. It's not impossible work. It's just hard, and it's only hard for a few minutes. Okay, or a couple of weeks. Accept that you have things to learn, and this is not a space to teach. So it's a learning space. So sharing is very different than teaching. So the vernacular right now is mansplaining, right? Well, or people-splaining or whatever, smart-splaining, whatever you want to do. That's not what we do here. So it's always a place of inquisition, inquiry, and conversation and reflection. And I don't have all the answers. That's why we do a collective model, because I don't have all the answers. And you don't want me to have all the answers, because then you have the Arthur show and well, you get what you get when you do that. Okay, reflect on your beliefs and values and consider that you may be wrong. Doesn't mean that you are. Just think about, well, am I wrong? I think about this all the time when I get pushback from folks that are struggling with this conversation. I think, well, maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. So I always have to stop and reflect. Always, 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 always. In fact, I've been doing this so long that I have a personal coach that I have to stop with and say, okay, this is where I'm at. I'm too close. Help me see what I'm supposed to see here. So it's not easy work, and no one is an expert by any stretch of the imaginations. And then the other piece that's important for me is next steps. We're always considering, how are we going to do the next thing? How are we going to improve? How are we going to make change? How are we going to make this better? So with that being said, the other piece that is really critical for me is that we created a space and a place and a way for individuals to stay focused. And we call this the respect model. Again, I've worked on these for a long, long time, and I codified it after I understood what I was doing. Right. So I did these for a long, long time, and this was organic. I didn't really think about it. And then at one meeting, I was with one of my co-presenters, one of my partners, and we were talking about it. I'm like, oh, this looks like we keep doing the same thing. So maybe we ought to put this down. And again, as I said, I like acronyms. They're fun. So this is the respect motto. You reflect, you engage, you stand up, you participate, you examine, you challenge, you take care of yourself. So again, reflection, examine, those two things we always talk about. You have to be self-reflective. You have to question everything. And it's not because you're bad. It's not because you're an evil person. It's because we're used to doing the things that we are used to doing, so we don't see them. I was speaking to one client not too long ago, and she was telling me about a presentation that she went to about all of this, about dismantling racism. And she left. She said, I left that thing thinking, oh my God, everything I thought I knew, I don't. And that was significant for her. It was a big deal for her to think about, oh my God, everything I understood about life is not what we think it is. So we really ask people to reflect and examine. Engagement means listening to me. It means asking questions. It means being participatory, and it is challenging. So it's hard to engage because it takes a lot of time, and we don't have time. So that's important to note. Engage and participate are the same, right? So while you engage, you also participate. So one of the things as an evaluator that everyone always gets crazy about is that I participate. I help you design the program. I help you get... I participate so that we are collectively building something that is functional. Working in isolation is crazy to me. So participate in everything. You know, there are times in some agencies as an ED where it is, we're doing a remodel of a house. And it's the last thing I want to do after working 60 hours or whatever and have to go on a Saturday to go do the house cleaning. But you got to participate. It's imperative. As leaders, that's what's expected of us. And then we take care of yourself. That, again, oh, man, this work is hard, number one. And number two, we're terrible at taking care of ourselves anyway. So these are critical. So this is kind of the agreement, the learning values and the respect model. These two are the agreement that we ask of you so that you can do this work and work with us. And again, it's fascinating, wonderful, amazing work. And it's not really as difficult as everyone wants to make it out. The difficult challenge is doing that first step and saying, I need to stand back and question everything. And I mean question everything. There is nothing, 100%, there is nothing that is not impacted by our institutionalized processes and the structures that exist. Okay, with that being said, because I told you I could talk forever, I'm going to move this to the end. So again, one last time, let's revisit what you think you know about me, what you've assumed based on what I've said, based on what I've shared, because I've shared a couple of things. And we think about, okay, so what? And I always tell people, no matter what it is you are doing, whatever you assume about me, you are absolutely wrong. And I can guarantee that almost 100% of the time, unless you know me. So, things to know about me. My first marriage was to an Air Force captain. We were together about 15 years and remain good friends. My second marriage in its 10th year this year. She's an amazing human being and the love of my life. My first marriage was to a man. My second marriage is to a woman. I use pronouns they, them intentionally because of my own gender identity. I was homeless for about 10 years, and beginning in 1980, when I turned 15 years old, my parents said, "Get out. You are too weird for us." And when I was 25 years old, I went into recovery from 13 years of addiction. You do the math. And I was 45 years old when I finally quit cigarettes after 35 years of smoking. Again, you do the math. So whatever we assume about anyone, no matter what it is, the story of our lives is really what we start to settle into. And for me, it's the critical element, is it not? For me, it's the part about what all of this is all about, is how can I live my life and be who I am and live without fear, live without so many people's anger, because we have to absorb it every day. Yeah. So in the big scheme of things, I'm totally willing to do whatever it takes so that I don't have to live like that, and others. Because I know that with my own capacity and my learning and my life or whatever, I have some skills to manage that. I'm not great. By no means is it perfect. My job in life is to walk folks through that, right? Is to help everybody else. And I'm willing to do that. But it's a ton of work. It's a commitment. And I've been working on this all my life, right? I've been working on me all my life, and I still question everything. I still am not sure. I still make stupid mistakes. I still say terrible things. I've done presentations where I've hurt people's feelings, and I've had to make amends, and on and on. It's hard work. But in the end, it's, to me, the bottom line is, if we know, then we're responsible. If I know that something in my agency is prohibiting or not moving forward for a certain staff person or a certain client, if I know that there are barriers that we ignore, we're still responsible. We can do nothing about it. You're still responsible, right? And for me, I'm responsible. And so I feel like in order to solve the problem for me, I have to solve the problem for me. So I get that's all I'll say. I think for me, again, I think it's important for you, if you are interested, please feel free to reach out to me. I am open to conversations. I do this constantly, all day long. Every day I talk to people about racism. It does not make a difference to me anymore that it is necessary, it's imperative, it's what I do. So I would, again, I would ask that you think about calling, talking, reaching out. And again, you have my information, and I will make sure it's on the last slide, and I'll let it sit out there so you can get my website, my email address, and my telephone number. And thank you all.